लास्ट क्लास में क्या हो रहा था, कोई मुझे अपडेट करेगा? विशांता
Ma'am, we talked about genetic recombination and bacteria and talked about the rolling circle model. Yeah.
रोलिंग सर्कल लास्ट क्लास में था। वैसे पहले बताओ कि व्हाट इज द सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ जेनेटिक वेरिएशन, व्हाई आर वी स्टडीइंग जेनेटिक वेरिएशन?
Genetic variation helps introduce changes in the genetic material of the bacteria and increases the chance of survival in different environments or adverse conditions by introducing genetic variations. Yeah.
Yeah, so in eukaryotes, you know that it happens through the process of cell division. Meiosis is a method of introducing variation. But in prokaryotes, due to the lack of sexual reproduction, you need to have a means, a separate means. So basically, we talked of two different ways in which variation can be introduced. What are the two ways? Vishantan, Dhwani, Bhavya, anybody?
Ma'am, mutations and horizontal gene transfer.
Mutations and horizontal gene transfer, जिसमें कि we said कि mutations का rate कम है. The cell has its own mechanism of actually repairing these errors, and very understandably so. I mean, anything that will play with the genetic makeup or the integrity of the genetic makeup, the cell has to have a mechanism to repair it. So it is mostly the horizontal gene transfer which leads to variations. एंड हमने रेप्लिकेशन में देखा था कि म्यूटेशन रेट क्या होता है. इट इज इम्पॉर्टेंट. So horizontal gene transfer, maybe like I said ki earlier, it was believed to be a rare event, but now we know that almost across the phylogenetic range you will find organisms, gram positive, gram negatives, everybody every organism introducing variation through horizontal gene transfer. Then I try to explain what is the difference between vertical gene transfer and horizontal gene transfer. Though vertical gene transfer is a terminology which is not commonly used. I mean, it's understood that parent to offspring transfer hota hai. And then I mentioned what is an exogenote, what is an endogenote, and there are four possible fates, jisme ki there is a difference even if it is able to an exogenote is able to self-replicate, and if it's not able to self-replicate, even if it escapes the restriction by host, so you would understand that one passes on, one is a stable recombinant. तो recombinant वहाँ है जहाँ पे कि variation exogenote के through आया है, that's called a recombinant. And then I briefly talked about the three modes or mechanisms of horizontal gene transfer. This was dependent on the means by which the exogenote is entering the host cell, and we talked about transformation wherein naked DNA can be taken up. We talked about transduction wherein a virus helps transfer the genetic material from one cell to the other, donor cell recipient, and the third was conjugation wherein you needed the physical contact between two cells. Now, transformation and transduction I'll only briefly cover. Hopefully, I'll do it today. But it will be taken up in detail in your molecular biology and genetics course. And conjugation is the one that I'll be taking up in detail. By next semester, it so happens that you tend to forget everything. Okay? But because I share all my lecture notes and PPTs, तुम लोग को थोड़ा ध्यान देना होगा, because Preeti ma'am is aware of everything that I teach, whatever topic. I know that तुम लोग ने उनके इंट्रोडक्शन में भी कुछ चीज़ें आंसर नहीं की थी तुम लोगों ने, जो कि मैंने ऑलरेडी पढ़ाया हुआ था. उन्होंने मुझसे पूछा और मैंने बताया कि मैंने तो पढ़ाया हुआ है इन लोगों को. बट एनीवे, थोड़ा सा ध्यान दीजिए आज, बिकॉज ये आपके मोलिकुलर बायोलॉजी एंड जेनेटिक्स का भी बेसिक वो है, बैकग्राउंड है. सो आई हैड in your second module, I had left the topic of viruses because I wanted to cover it here when I take up transduction. So I'll start with viruses, and then we'll move to the three mechanisms of genetic transfer. Yeah. So the significance, I don't have to explain to you the significance in the current age. I mean, the global economy or everything connected has been affected really bad just because of these entities which are smaller than the viruses. But the existence of viruses was realized even during the time of Pasteur. Okay, so there were that there are pathogenic agents which are smaller than bacteria that exist, and in fact, it is said that Pasteur was just a step away from discovering viruses. He is not credited for the discovery of viruses, though he worked on rabid dogs, and he found that he could not culture the agent for rabies. So for this, the general term used back then was virus, which was general in the sense that anything which was causing an infectious disease was called as virus, as it means poison. And the credit to discovering viruses actually goes to a Russian biologist by the name of Dmitry Ivanovsky, who was working with tobacco mosaic virus. It is one of the best studied viruses. And towards the end of 18th century, 1892 or something, he confirmed Pasteur's hypothesis of an infectious agent which is smaller than the bacteria. Now, there are various reasons which make these mysterious organisms an interesting topic for study. They are actually considered as a gray area between living and non-living things, and also between biology and chemistry. So categorizing them as non-living has excluded them from studying the evolution of life, and also it has excluded them from the classification of living organisms. You saw that viruses did not have a place there, whether it was Whittaker's system or it was Voice's system. Now, a virus particle, which is a virus particle outside is its host, when it is in the non-living form, is called as a virion. So basically, it's an extracellular phase. But when a virus is inside a host cell, it has the ability to take over the host's machinery, and in fact, it dictates the host to work for its benefit. So this it can do by just a short stretch of nucleic acid, which could be DNA or RNA. We'll see what are the different variations found in the genetic material. Of course, they play a role in introducing genetic variation in the host, and so they also make up excellent vectors to make transgenics in the lab. They are routinely used. In fact, the whole idea of studying transformation, transduction, conjugation is because they are used in recombinant DNA technology, wherein you change the genetic makeup of organisms, right from microorganisms to higher organisms. But despite years of technological advancements, there are still unresolved mysteries. And of course, we are all party to this fact in the ongoing situation. There are three parameters based on which viruses are classified. That is its size and its shape. Then the chemical composition and the structure of the genome. There's a lot of variability found in the genome itself between different types of viruses. And the third criteria is the mode of replication. So we'll briefly cover up all these parameters, especially the mode of replication, because this is important in terms of introducing variation in bacteria. And also, we have covered rolling circle. As I mentioned, it is a mode which is followed by viruses as well as plasmids. Now, structurally, as I said, they're very simple. Besides the genetic material, they have a proteinaceous covering called as a capsid. The role of a capsid, of course, is protection of the viral nucleic acid from host cell enzymes like nucleases and other factors. And together, you generally call the genetic material and the capsid as nucleocapsid. There are some viruses which have a second protective layer known as the envelope. This layer is usually derived from the cell membrane of the host with certain modifications. You will see it is very similar to in chemical composition to that of the host cell. Now, most viruses, they have either RNA or DNA as the genetic material. and all kinds of variations have been observed in the genetic material possessed by viruses. The nucleic acids could be single or double stranded, so you can even have DNA single stranded, you can even have RNA double stranded. The genetic material could be linear, it could even be circular. The simplest viruses, they contain genetic material which is sufficient for encoding just 2 to 4 proteins, while the complex ones have from the information to encode for approximately 100 to 200 proteins also. Now, while mostly the viral genomes are haploid, you know what haploid is, they contain only one copy of the gene. There are also retroviruses wherein there is diploidy. The genome could be monopartite, which means that only one molecule of nucleic acid would have all viral genes, or it could even be जिसको segmented भी कहते हैं, wherein the viral genes are distributed in multiple molecules of nucleic acid. In addition to this, there are some viruses which have modified bases present in the genetic material. So, for example, there could be uracil in the place of thymine in DNA. Then there are certain variations like C, A, and G in the DNA could be methylated. So the cytosine can be methylated to 7-hydroxymethyl-cytosine. I don't know if you've heard about these unusual bases in your biochemistry class, but this has a significance. So actually what it does, it tries to demarcate the viral DNA from the host cell DNA, and it makes the viral DNA resistant to the endonucleases of the host. So it can evade the host restriction process. Again, if the nucleic acid is RNA, then also there can be two configurations possible. If the genomic RNA is of the same sense as the mRNA, that is, it can directly synthesize protein, it's called as a positive sense or a plus sense genome. While if the nucleotide sequence is complementary to the mRNA, it's called as a negative sense genome. Now, because of the presence of RNA, there are some viruses which violate the central dogma. Central dogma you're aware of is this direction. The flow of information is always from DNA to RNA to protein by the process of transcription and translation respectively. In viruses, this reverses. In retroviruses, DNA is synthesized from RNA by a process called as reverse transcription. What is interesting is that while viruses, they contain the blueprint in the form of RNA or it is in the form of DNA, they lack the capacity to independently read this information and to act upon this stored information. So there are no ribosomes or other enzymes for the flow of information to happen, and the virus always requires the host cell for this action. The only other component a virus has is the capsid, which is a proteinaceous cover. And the cover, one of the roles I already told you, it is to protect the genetic material, but the other kind of role that it plays is to facilitate the entry of the genetic material into the host cell as well. It is composed of multiple copies, either one protein or few different proteins, and the units are called as, the subunits are called as capsomeres. Usually you'll see that there is self-assembly of a viral capsid, and it follows two basic patterns, either a helical symmetry or of course, the name suggests helical symmetry means the protein subunits are arranged in a helix around the nucleic acid. While icosahedral symmetry is a symmetry in which protein subunits assemble into a shell-like structure, which protects the genetic material inside the core. And then there is a third kind of symmetry, which is called as the complex symmetry, which is a combination of both helical and icosahedral symmetry. Viruses with helical symmetry, they have identical protein subunits, and the protein subunits are called as protomers. So they self-assemble. Just going to show you an animation here. I hope it comes up. Okay, not an issue. I had actually introduced an animation here, but it's somehow not visible. Anyway, it showed how the protomers would align in a helical fashion, covering this genetic material in the center. So such nucleocapsids, they form an elongated structure, which could be rigid or it could even be a flexible kind of structure. And the most extensively studied helical virus is the first virus to be discovered, that is tobacco mosaic virus, or TMV in short. An icosahedron is a polyhedron having 20 equilateral triangle faces and 12 vertices. And in a perfectly icosahedral viruses, the subunits actually, they form pentameric structure. So like such pentamers which associate at the vertices of a small icosahedron. In quasi-symmetrical viruses, a single type of subunit can play different roles. So they can form, for example, here, if you see, they can form such pentameric structures that assemble at the vertices, but they also assemble in slightly different manner to form hexamers to cover the faces of the large icosahedrons. So these are the two symmetries, the helical and the icosahedral symmetry. The complex symmetry is usually found in larger viruses, which consists of both helical as well as icosahedral symmetries. Now, a virus that infects only bacteria is called as a bacteriophage, or you also call it simply as a phage. This, what I'm showing you here, is a representative bacteriophage with a complex symmetry, T4 bacteriophage. You have these numbering of T1, T2, and so on and so forth. The T4 bacteriophage consists of a head, which has a double-stranded viral DNA, and then there is a tail which is connected to the base plate. It is on the base plate wherein you have tail fibers. These tail fibers are the ones which help recognize the host cell and then anchor the phage to the host cell by the help of these pins. These pins here. The tail also has the ability to actually puncture the host cell for injection of the genetic material inside the host. So this kind of a complex, and you see here certain internal proteins may be present depending on the kind of virus that we're talking of. You can have a few proteins as well inside the capsid. Now there's some viruses which have an additional covering called as the envelope, which is usually derived from, like I said, the host cell membrane. It is made up of a lipid bilayer, the exterior of which is impregnated by virus encoded membrane proteins. So I mentioned to you that there could be modifications of the cell membrane of the host. These are the modifications that you observe. So enveloped viruses often display such kind of spikes or knobs. In viruses that acquire the envelope by budding through the plasma membrane or another cell membrane organelles, the lipid composition closely reflects that of the particular host membrane, because that is where it derives its envelope from. The function, of course, the envelope can be considered as an additional protective layer. Okay, so understanding the molecular events accompanying virus replication is essential for the proper understanding and also for the control of viral diseases. We will only talk about what I'm showing you here is just the life cycle of a bacteriophage, and there's some error in the animation again. Anyway, the events involved in the life cycle of a bacteriophage include first adsorption, then penetration, replication, and finally release. So once it infects a susceptible cell, a virus can direct the cell machinery to produce more viruses. And in most of the cases, like I mentioned, virus would utilize the host's ribosomes, the host tRNAs, and other factors for synthesis of these proteins. I'm sorry, it's something about the network issue that you're getting such weird animation. Most of the viral protein products, they fall into three categories. So there could be special enzymes which are needed for viral replication. Then there could be inhibitory factors that stop the host cell machinery, whether it is DNA synthesis, RNA synthesis, or protein synthesis. And the third type is structural proteins, which are used in the construction of new virions. So basically, just these three types of information that is stored in the genetic material. And it is the structural proteins which generally make up the larger amount compared to the other two types. The replication is rolling circle mode. We will also come across the rolling circle mode in viruses in transduction. And after the synthesis of hundreds to thousands of the new virions, the infected cell is ruptured or lysed, releasing all the virions at once. So what happens is the host cell is lysed, and hence this kind of a life cycle is called as the lytic cycle of a bacteriophage, including all these four processes till it lyses. So this is what was going on, what I tried to show in the animation, wherein the phage injects its DNA into the cytoplasm. The DNA directs the synthesis of new phages. The cell lyses and releases the newer virion particles. But in some cases, unlike the lytic cycle, after the entry of the bacteriophage DNA molecule, it actually becomes integrated into the host cell. Okay. So as the cell's DNA is replicated, even the integrated viral DNA is replicated and passed on to the newer generation. So it's copied, and when the cell divides, it enters into the daughter cells as well. Unlike the lytic cycle, this is called as a lysogenic cycle, and the integrated phage DNA, the integrated DNA with the chromosome, it's referred to as a prophage. Under specific conditions, the prophage DNA is activated. So it could be any of the stresses like UV, even that triggers excision from the host chromosome, and it then enters into the lytic cycle for a release. So for a period of time, it might maintain the lysogenic cycle, and then it enters into the lytic cycle. Such kind of viruses are called as temperate phages. Unlike lytic phages, these are temperate phages. So both of these cycles are found in the bacteriophages. This is just to satisfy your interest if you have any questions related to the coronavirus, because this is an enveloped virus and we talked about it, and also the life cycle, but I'm not going to go into the detail of the life cycle of coronavirus. I will move to the why can't I just give me a minute, and I'm not able to. I will now talk about the role of viruses in recombination. If there are any questions with viruses, you can ask me now. Otherwise, I'll start with where we left for our recombination lecture. And why did we cover it here? I mean, because we're going to study this. Yeah, so this is where we were in the last class. Okay. We talked about the three modes, and I gave you a brief about how the three modes are different. I would like to cover at least the first two today: transformation and transduction, and leave conjugation for the next class. Yes, so here again, transformation is when you don't need physical contact, or you don't even need a live cell for transfer. Transduction is when the virus is actually taking up DNA from one cell, delivering it to the other, and conjugation is when this is the only mode wherein you need live cells and physical contact. Now, what is required in transformation is DNA persistent in the environment, which would have come from a cell which would have been alive some earlier. And another requirement is that the recipient cell should have the ability to take up free DNA. Okay, this is not something which every cell in all its throughout its life cycle does. So bacterial cells with such an ability to take up extracellular DNA are termed as competent cells. And transformation is believed to work best with DNA from closely related species. Whether it is intergeneric or whether it is interspecies, usually closely related species lead to best transformation. And of course, once the exogenote enters the cytoplasm, so for example, here you can see a degradation of the unrecombined DNA or the DNA that did not combine. But it could have any of the four fates. One is host restriction. The four fates we talked about in the last class itself. Not all bacteria, like I said, have the ability to take up exogenous DNA from the environment. They can either be naturally competent, or even in lab we can make cells competent, and this is called as artificially competent cells. Competence might occur as in response to various environmental conditions like starvations, or even some cell density might affect competence. The naturally competent bacteria, they have a dedicated protein machinery to transfer DNA across the cell membrane. And while there's some differences between the mechanism of uptake in gram positives and gram negative due to their difference in the cell envelope, mostly they share some proteins involved in the process. The first step, of course, is binding of the free DNA first to the cell surface, followed by its uptake by an enzyme called as DNA translocase. So translocation is done of the DNA. And the uptake across the membrane is only of single-stranded DNA. With the other strand, if you can see here, notice here, the double strand binds. However, what enters is the single strand in both the cases. Due to the complex nature of cell envelope in gram-negative cells, there are specific channels on the outer membrane which facilitate such kind of a channel-like thing, which facilitate the uptake of DNA. So the machinery is a little more complex in the gram-negatives. Now, as there are various applications that can be met by employing the process of transformation, it is routinely used in lab to introduce a gene of interest. Bacterial cells are made artificially competent by either using chemicals like calcium chloride or even by applying electrical pulses. Now, chemical induction involves incubating the cells in a solution containing divalent cations. Most commonly, calcium chloride is used under cold conditions, which is then exposed to a pulse of heat. So a heat shock is then applied. The mechanism of the uptake via chemically induced competence is not very clear. The surface of the bacteria is negatively charged due to phospholipids and also due to LPS on its cell surface. And the DNA is also negatively charged. So basically, one function would be to shield the charges facilitating uptake of DNA. It is believed that the repulsion between the foreign DNA and the bacterial cell, owing to the negative charge on them, are overcome by these divalent cations. And the heat shock that is applied upon treatment with calcium chloride generates a thermal imbalance on either side, thereby driving the DNA inside the cell. Another means by which cells can be made competent is by subjecting them to electrical pulses, and this process is called as electroporation. Electroporation, basically pores generated due to electrical stimuli. In this case, the cells are briefly exposed to electric shock, which is believed to create these transient holes in the cell membranes through which the extracellular DNA may enter. And after the electric shock, the holes are rapidly closed. You know of the self-healing mechanism and the cells repair mechanism, which can heal these transient ruptures. Now, there are certain classical experiments, 2 or 3 of which related to the genetic recombination, which I would like to present to you in this course, because you're not going to get an idea of all these in the further advanced courses. One of this is a classical experiment by Griffith way back in 1928, which was one of the first to show that bacterial cells can actually take up DNA. I wouldn't say DNA then, but we'll see how it came to the concept of transformation. So this experiment involved 2 strains of Streptococcus pneumoniae, which causes pneumonia. There's a rough strain and a smooth strain. The rough strain is non-pathogenic, and because it lacks a capsule, it's called as a rough strain, while the smooth strain is the one which is pathogenic, and the capsule actually helps in escaping the host immune system by escaping phagocytosis. So the capsule, the appearance is smooth just because of the presence of the capsule. And what Griffith observed was, so basically he set up experiments in parallel. When he analyzed the effects of live R cells, live S cells, and heat-killed S cells or S strains of pneumonia on live mice. So when mice were injected with live S strain, it is understandable that the mice would die. When he injected the mice with live R strain or heat-killed S strain, either of the two, the mice survived, because like I said, R is not pathogenic, and if it's heat-killed S strain, it did not survive at all. But when he injected the mice with a mixture of live R strain matlab ki it is not going to be pathogenic, together with heat-killed S strain, the mice died. Okay. And upon isolating the live bacteria from the dead mouse, he recovered that he could only isolate S strain of bacteria. So inject kiya tha live R and heat killed S, but what he recovered was S strain of bacteria, live S strain of bacteria. And when he then injected this S strain into fresh mice, the mice died. कुछ समझ में आ रहा है किसी को? पूछो. Everything is clear, right? The heat kills smooth strain, rough strain. Kaise rough strain is non-virulent, and what is the rough strain and heat kills smooth strain? समझ में आया कि माउस कैसे die कर रहा है?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So he concluded that something had passed from the heat-killed S strain into the live R strain and transformed it. That's how transformation came into picture. It transformed it into the pathogenic S strain. And this Griffith called as transforming principle. Okay, so this experiment, this classical experiment is known as Griffith's transformation experiment. Though at that point of time, the characteristic of this transforming principle was not understood. So it is not as if DNA was established as the transforming principle by Griffith's experiment. It was the next set of experiments which were conducted by Avery, MacLeod, and McCarty. What they did was they prepared cultures containing the heat-killed S strain. They removed 2 biomolecules. They removed lipids and carbohydrates from the solution of the heat-killed S strain. And then they treated the solution with different digestive enzymes. So basically, he had to remove in a stepwise manner. They removed they added proteinases for removal of protein, RNases for removal of RNA, and DNases for removal of DNA. And they introduced then the living R strain cells to the culture to see which cultures would develop the transformed S strain, and only in the culture treated with DNAs. So only here no cells, no S cells appeared, which made it clear that the genetic component that was being transferred was DNA. The transforming principle was DNA. So these classic experiments actually were had a revolutionary impact on microbiology as well as genetics, especially bacterial genetics. Hence, I elaborated. Now, finally, coming to the last topic for the day. I don't think I have time for conjugation. So, the second mechanism is by transduction, and this, as you know, is virus mediated. Due to the high specificity of the phages for cell surface receptors, this particular mechanism has the narrowest host range of DNA transfer among the methods of bacterial genetic exchange, the three methods that we are covering. In transduction, the bacterial donor DNA is incorporated into the bacteriophage, and after the bacterial DNA is incorporated into the phage, when the new phages are released, these phages infect the host bacterial cell. So phages, they attach to these specific surface receptors, and then, like we saw in this animation, which was not clear, they inject the DNA containing their DNA containing the donor DNA as well into the cytoplasm of the host bacterial cell. And based on how the DNA is packaged within the viral particle, there are again two types of transduction which are possible. This you of course know. You know that the Lytic cycle and how the lysogenic cycle runs. I mean, this is just a repetition here. The two types of transduction are generalized transduction and specialized transduction. अब name से ही समझ में आ रहा है generalized and specialized क्या होगा. In the case of generalized transducing phages, these phages are produced by an error during packaging of the DNA. So because of the error, there is insertion of random fragments of the bacterial DNA into the phage head. Instead of the phage DNA, you have the host DNA entering into the phage head. So there is random transfer of, so for example, this A plus is a host, is a section of the host DNA. It is randomly entering into the phage head. This black color denotes that. And once that affects the other cell or the recipient cell, this particular marker can be transferred. But this is a completely random process. Okay. On the contrary, the specialized transduction, this is observed in the case of temperate phages. Abhi maine temperate phages bataya tha, those phages which can integrate into the genetic material of the host and can stay in that phase for a while. So that is called a prophage. You will see that specialized transduction is only mediated by temperate phages, and इसमें क्या होता है? There is faulty excision of the prophage. So when this cell is activated such that the prophage DNA is excised, it could happen that the prophage DNA is excised incorrectly. And when I say incorrectly, I mean that it could take up adjoining bacterial DNA. So it could be on either of the side that, for example, the excision is only at the ends of this blue segment. It might excise somewhere to the on both either of the sides, such that the bacterial genetic material is packaged into the viral head. And then when this infects a recipient cell, you can understand that the host markers can be transferred to the recipient cell. बट यहाँ पे क्यों स्पेशलाइज्ड है? बिकॉज देयर कैनॉट बी अ रैंडम ट्रांसफर ऑफ द बैक्टीरियल क्रोमोसोम, ओनली द फ्लैंकिंग मार्कर्स, the markers flanking the region of integration are the only ones which can be transferred, whether it is on the let's say on the left side here or the right side here. Either A plus or B plus can be transferred here, leading to the formation of recombinant bacteria. Yeah, so I think we can also take up conjugation. I'll just briefly mention to you one or two things, and then we'll continue. Conjugation we cannot finish today, but I'm going to just certain things. Okay, so transformation done, transduction done. Both of them you saw did not require a live cell or even physical contact. The third mechanism, which is conjugation, as the name suggests, conjugation means, or conjugate means connect or to couple. So in this form of transfer, the DNA, the donor and the recipient cells need to stay connected for the transfer of genetic material. And it is well studied in E. coli, where there is transfer of the F plasmid. हम लोगों ने जब plasmids cover किया था, I told you there are different kinds of plasmid. F plasmid is stands for fertility plasmid. So this is transferred through conjugation. Otherwise, it's a mechanism found in both gram positive and gram negative, but we'll concentrate only on E. coli and F plasmid. A conjugative plasmid, for example, like the F plasmid, is in the donor, it confers the ability to self-transfer. So it transfers itself, but it can also mobilize other non-conjugative extra chromosomal genetic material which are present in the donor cell to the recipient cell. Now the F plasmid is a circular episome. Episome means it can either replicate autonomously, or it can also integrate with the host chromosome. It can have both these both these forms of existence. And in the F plasmid, you will have an ORI-T, origin of transfer, it's called as, which promotes a special mode, unidirectional replication, wherein the leading strand, there's only one single leading strand which serves as the replication. You saw in the rolling circle model how there's this one strand which was in continuity with the leading strand was in template strand on the other side. So this is the rolling circle mode which is used in conjugative transfer of the F plasmid. The F factor, it encodes genes for the sexual pili, which is a thin rod-like structure that carries the F plasmid from the donor to the recipient. And there are three kinds of matings possible. So basically, there was a question earlier by Ashi whether this is a unidirectional transfer. So basically, the transfer is always from a F plus cell to a F minus cell. F plus is a cell which has the F plasmid. F minus does not have an F plasmid. So the transfer is always from F plus to F minus. Then there are two other possibilities. HFR is called as high frequency of recombinants. HFR is when the plasmid is integrated into the host genome. In that case, if there is a mating between the bacterial cell and an F minus cell, so if HFR into F minus mate, that is a second kind of mating possible. And a third kind of mating, we will cover all these matings. So F plus into F minus, HFR into F minus, and the third type is F prime. Now F prime, like you saw in the transduction specialized mode, F prime is when the excision of HFR back to its independent moiety is incorrect. So again, F prime will have a part of the host chromosome integrated into it. So even F prime can mate with F minus. Yeah, so we'll finish up with these experiments of Lederberg and Tatum. I'm not sure if biology वाले lecture SBL में तुमने ये किया होगा. But this is to tell you how conjugation was discovered, or how people realized that physical transfer is required. तुम लोग को अगर याद हो, I talked about auxotrophs. Anybody auxotrophs क्या होते हैं? हम लोग लास्ट क्लास में म्यूटेशन कर रहे थे, and I specifically mentioned this because it was to be used in our concept of conjugation. Anybody remembers what auxotrophs are?
Ma'am, the ones which need to be supplemented along with the minimal media.
Dhwani, you want to add something?
Yeah, basically they were organisms that had mutations such that some biochemical pathway was disrupted.
Correct, yes. So you're right, Ashi and Dhwani. You basically, because one of the biochemical pathways would have been adversely affected, the inherent ability to produce a particular metabolite, or for example, we talked of amino acid, was affected. So in the particular medium, you needed to supplement it with these moieties. And way back in 1946, Lederbach and Tatum, what they did was they generated not single auxotroph, मतलब एक moiety के लिए नहीं, but double or triple auxotroph. So for example, biotin negative, phenylalanine negative, cysteine negative. This is a triple auxotroph. And what they did was they mated, for example, this auxotroph was mixed with another auxotroph deficient in some other moiety. So for example, if this is bio-negative, this is bio-positive. So this is a prototroph for bio. And when individual, this auxotroph, this double mutant or triple mutant, could not grow on minimal media, which is understandable. It cannot synthesize some of these components, so they need to be supplemented. Just the minimal media will not support the growth of this particular auxotroph. Same is the case with the one in blue. It cannot grow on a minimum medium. However, if the two were mixed, they found that on minimal medium, cells could grow. मतलब क्या मतलब है इसका? What does this observation mean? Anybody? Distinct markers हैं दोनों strains में, जो individually they cannot grow because they are defective. However, once mixed, they formed prototroph. You could have prototrophs. Of course, you'll call them prototrophs because no supplements are needed. तो ऐसा कैसे हो रहा है? क्या समझ में आया लेडरबर्ग एंड टेटम के एक्सपेरिमेंट से? कोई मुझे बोलेगा?
That there is exchange of genetic material such that probably the mutation that was hindering one from synthesizing whatever substrate it needed, that was being made up for by getting the complementary genetic.
हाँ, so it was being made up, ये तो समझ में आ रहा है कहीं से, तो वो compensate कर रहा है, but it was definitely not talking about any genetic material transfer, ध्वनि, है ना? क्योंकि if blue one is able to synthesize biotin, it can actually also, there was a hypothesis or there was an idea that it probably was also cross feeding. So this one was deficient in certain moieties and this one was for the other moiety. So there will probably, there's some cross feeding also which benefits the two, and ultimately what happens is every organism was in a win-win situation and they could grow on this minimal media. So here genetic transfer was not indicated, but definitely it meant that there was some kind of complementarity. It was only by the experiment of Davis, called as Davis's U-tube experiment, wherein it was realized that there is a requirement of physical contact for this particular change to happen. So for example, here what they did was, if you see, this is a MET negative and this is a MET positive strain, negative for the other amino acids. When the two were separated by this sieved glass filter, which permitted the transfer of material but not of cells, and pressure or suction was applied for this mixing, and then when the green one and the red one were plated, they still could not grow on the minimal media. Okay, so this basically countered the hypothesis in the earlier experiment that there was probably some cross feeding wherein the molecules synthesized by this helped out the other strain, and somehow there was compensation. So what they did was, then when they removed the glass filter and further incubated it and then plated it, they found the same result as here. So basically this proved that there was a physical contact needed for any such kind of transformation. It was not just material transfer between the two. Okay. Dhwani, is that clear now?
Yes, ma'am, understood.
ठीक है. तो लेडरबर्ग ने ये नहीं कहा था कि फिजिकल कॉन्टैक्ट जेनेटिक मटेरियल ट्रांसफर हो रहा है. ये डेविस के एक्सपेरिमेंट से ये क्लियर हुआ था. Okay, so basically I have the 3 mating types left in conjugation, which I'll probably cover in the next class because I want to cover the 3 together. If there are any doubts, please let me know, students. From the 2 modes of transfer from viruses from these classical experiments. ये ग्रिफिथ और एवेरी मैक्लियोड का एक्सपेरिमेंट तुम लोगों ने किसी और उसमें बायोकेमिस्ट्री में किया या एसबीएल में किया था क्या, विशांतन?
No, ma'am, not yet.
अच्छा, तो definitely now you should remember that these are the classical. So whether it is Griffith, Avery McLeod, or even Lederberg and Tatum and Davis experiment, these were all, like I said, revolutionary experiments for bacterial genetics. ठीक है, so I don't see anybody raising hands. We will then close this. We will talk about conjugation, the 3 mating types in the next class, and that will by that we'll finish the module on bacterial genetics, and we'll move to biochemistry then, microbial biochemistry then. Okay students, then I'm winding the class. Bye bye.
Thank you, ma'am.